Chairman, Deputies and Senators, thank you for the invitation to meet with us today and to brief you on the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. The enormity of the crisis in Sudan is hard to comprehend. As a result of the ongoing conflict, deliberate disruption of humanitarian aid, displacement and disruption of services, people are dying of hunger, with famine declared in North Darfur and thought to be much more widespread. An incredible number, 26 million people's lives hang in the balance. 9 million children are food insecure, 3.4 million are at high risk of epidemic diseases, and more than 700,000 children under 5 years old risk dying from starvation. Floods further threaten the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. More than 12 million people have fled their homes. Many have been forced to flee repeatedly with little access to shelter, income and basic necessities. Civilians are suffering horrific forms of abuse and gender-based violence. Reports of indiscriminate attacks, killings and other atrocities are widespread. The steps the Irish government has taken in recent weeks to bring attention to the crisis in Sudan is significant. We welcome the Taoiseach's address in the Dáil, where he committed to using Ireland's voice to demand a ceasefire, humanitarian access, protection of civilians and accountability for human rights abuses. We also acknowledge the Taoiseach's remarks at the UN General Assembly High-Level Week to highlight the crisis in Sudan, and we're encouraged by Minister Fleming's address at the UN General Assembly, where he stated that we must do whatever it takes to pressure the parties to come back to the negotiating table and bring an end to the destructive cycle of violence. It is vital that this high level of diplomatic engagement on this crisis is sustained. Ireland's public voice and leadership is recognised, impactful and appreciated by civil society. However, we believe it is important that Ireland's voice as a champion for those furthest behind is matched by its funding. At a time when there are devastating crises in Sudan, Middle East and other parts of the world, it is deeply disappointing that there is no additional funding for development and humanitarian assistance in Budget 2025. We fear that there is a growing disconnect between the escalating needs globally and our own ODA funding as we move further and further away from reaching the government's targets of 0.7% GNI on overseas development assistance by 2030. Getting the response that Sudan needs right now is our first priority, but the level of destruction and devastation encountered by the Sudanese people will take a generation to overcome. That is why longer-term funding and commitment is critical. Many of our members, including those here with me today, are working with communities in Sudan and in neighbouring countries and are persevering in the most challenging and difficult circumstances to deliver humanitarian aid. This committee has been a strong champion for those affected by humanitarian crises and the calls of Dóchas and its members. We ask the committee to uphold Ireland's commitment to reach 0.7% GNI on overseas development assistance and to publish a pathway to achieve this. Also, to use all political efforts to bring about an end to the hostilities through an immediate ceasefire and an inclusive peace process. We ask that coordinated diplomatic efforts are accelerated to push for unfettered humanitarian access using all cross-line and cross-border routes. We ask the committee to use Ireland's role on the executive committees of WFP, UNICEF and the Central Emergency Response Fund, CERF, to ensure humanitarian aid is appropriate, timely and delivered at scale, and to ensure accountability and oversight on where and how the funding is allocated. We ask that Ireland is vocal in its condemnation of the violation of international legal norms in this conflict, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. And we ask that Ireland amplify the voices of the women of Sudan, ensuring that all efforts to end violence, resolve conflict and establish a pathway to peace and justice includes their meaningful and equitable participation.